Most of the time, Clash of Clans updates are great, but sometimes things go wrong and developers have to roll it back, press the undo button, you know? Today, we're looking at those things that were changed at some point, and for one reason or another, it got reverted. So let's get right into it.
Let's do this.
Big Boy Rework. As you know, the Super Witch spawns big boys instead of regular skeletons, and these have always been 20 housing space. Now you may be wondering, why on earth does housing space matter for a sub-troop? It's not like you train and deploy them yourself, but this is crucial for the big boys because it helps them not get yeeted out of existence from a spring trap. This alone helps them stay relevant to a degree. They don't level up, so everything that can help them survive is crucial. However, in March 2025, they reduced this housing space from 20 to 10. So although more of them could be cloned or recalled, for example, they were now susceptible to spring traps. This small rework was much more like a massive nerf because now the big boys' survivability went down dramatically. And honestly, they were kind of trash at higher town hall levels, so this change was absolutely unnecessary. And for a while, it seemed like a permanent change. RIP Super Witches, right? But interestingly, less than a year later, in January 2026, Supercell ended up backtracking on this and reverted the housing space back to 20, and subsequently buffing the Super Witch. They didn't say anything about this, but they probably realized they had nerfed it so hard that they had to give it some love. Gold Pass changes. So as you know, every season gives you a free skin in the Gold Pass, and it's been that way since the very first season in the game. With that said, in September 2024, the tabletop RPG season was announced, and we saw the usual 4 skins that were coming. Okay, cool, but they were all legendary. They weren't given away a legendary. None of them were in the Gold Pass. Instead, Gold Pass buyers will receive this Decision Dice decoration. Now, a lot of people didn't mind the decoration itself. It was one of the first interactable decorations ever, but cool enough to replace the skin in every future Gold Pass from now on. I don't know, dog. A lot of players were not on board. The problem here was that they didn't communicate this prior to the change, they just did it, like Nike's slogan. On that day, they explained the main reason for this change was to offer a cosmetic item that was usable by all players, regardless of their town hall level. And yes, that is a fair explanation, but this eventually led to a Gold Pass boycott, and 4 days later, Supercell did eventually add the skin back, and some. Yes, pass buyers got to keep the dice, got a legendary Warden skin at the end of the pass, and they added 2 builder potions and 20 starry ore on the free track for everybody. In the end, Supercell explained they failed to anticipate the decoration storage issues many players were facing and the high perceived value of skins. This change was originally supposed to be for every pass from there on out, but since then, they have not tried to replace the skins. Cyber scenery effect. This one is a smaller one, but it had to do with the cyber scenery. So when it came out in July 2025, every building, decoration, and obstacle had this bright neon glow around it and under it. So the buildings and decorations were blue and the obstacles were purple. But 3 months later, they changed it to this. Yeah, you could barely tell that the effect was there. It wasn't even noticeable unless you zoomed in. Understandably, this made a lot of players upset because they can't just go removing things after you buy, you know? But they did, and days and weeks passed and we heard nothing on it. Over a month and a half later in November 2025, they'd finally add it back. They explained they changed it because it was a bit tough on the eyes, and there were a lot of complaints about this at the time. Like, what is this? There's too much noise, dagnabbit. And this all happened at the same time they added the hide decoration button in the settings. So yes, this was definitely a complicated topic at the time, but they did add it back thanks to community feedback. Inferno Tower redesign. In June 2018, the level 6 Inferno was added, and this is what it looked like. Just your typical style. In fact, it was so typical that players were saying it was a downgrade, that the level 5 looked way better than this one, and that this one looked like it belonged at the lower town hall levels. So the artists at Supercell decided to update the design and change the lens shape. I don't think people were complaining about that part. they were complaining about the theme. So obviously the complaints continued. Finally, almost a year later in June 2019, the lens shape was reverted back to the normal circular look, and instead, the theme was given a nice overhaul. Healer's mechanics. So in terms of traps, the healer originally triggered the regular air and seeking air mine, as well as any skeleton traps set to air. After all, she is a flying troop, and that's what these traps were made for, flying troops, right? However, in February 2015, they decided to make her invisible to all air traps, so she no longer activated any of them. I couldn't find any reasoning behind this, but it was likely to make her more useful, as prior to this update, they were pretty risky, setting them in and they would die from an air trap. However, this buff eventually led to the rise of Queen Walk and Mass Bowler and Healer. And while these strategies weren't bad for the game, they were incredibly OP. And the problem was largely the healers. They were just too good and they would not die. They didn't immediately undo this change. Instead, they tried to nerf them in other ways first. But eventually, in August of 2016, they'd revert this change and would instead work on other ways to make the healer more useful. Ever since then, the healer has triggered air traps like she originally did. Free spell redesign. This is the free spells animation and effects. It's been that way since it was added in 2013. But in February 2025, developers decided to change that. They gave it a new refresh, gave it a nice coat of paint, Now, it's important to note that while most players didn't care about the change, I mean, it's a free spell, dude. There was a vocal minority that absolutely hated it. That was not the reason for its removal though. It turned out there was a bug with it. The sizing was incorrect, so it would appear to not freeze buildings that it should have. And it also made the ice golems freeze way bigger, but last less time. So 3 days later, they were forced to revert it back to normal, probably so they can go back and fix it and add it back. But it is very likely that at this point, developers were like, well, people didn't like it anyway, so why add it back? So reverting it back to normal temporarily became permanent, and we never got it back. Progress bars. So, info screens have had progress bars since the inception of the game. They have always been there, and they give us a rough idea of just how far we are from maxing that building or troop. But in October 2023, they overhauled the info screens and decided to do away with the progress bars. Very quickly, the community let Supercell know how terrible of a change this was. Less than a month later, former community manager Darian would respond, saying that it was simply overlooked and that honestly, the whole overhaul was sort of rushed, and that they were taking all the community feedback into consideration. Finally, in February 2025, the progress bars returned. They didn't exactly undo the update. Instead, they had to build the new ones from the ground up. But I thought it still counted as them reverting a decision. Wall upgrades. So ever since the game launched, wall upgrades have always been done with gold. This was because originally the idea was that elixir was used to train and upgrade your army, and gold strictly for improving your base. But in September 2014, they'd bend the rules, if you will, and decided to let us upgrade any wall level 7 or higher with elixir. This was great, but it quickly caused a loot drought at the lower Town Hall levels. So it was impossible to find any elixir at Town Hall 7 and 8 because everyone was upgrading their walls. So what ended up happening was they had to revert this change for some specific levels of walls, 7 and 8. It was a huge bummer for sure because we got something and then they took it away. But luckily, years later, they would eventually revert this change again. And nowadays, walls can be upgraded with elixir as low as level 5. Trader deal limits. So as you may know, there is a limit to how many of each item you can buy, and that also includes resources. A limit was supposed to be present when the Client Capital launched, but at the very last second, they removed the limit. So you can literally spend all your raid medals on any resources for both the home village and builder base. And it was like this for a while, almost a year. But in March 28, 2023, they would add the limit back. Not exactly a one-to-one revert here, but worse, because the limit was now just 1. This upset a lot of players, and a lot of them thought that surely Supercell was going to revert this change once they realized how big of a mistake this is, but that never came. Since then, it's been the same way. Global chat. This was undoubtedly the biggest go back moment in Clash history. Global chat was present at the time the game launched in 2012, and for a while, it kind of just existed. A couple of changes here and there, but nothing major. Eventually though, moderating this chat became a huge issue. There were a lot of things going on that shouldn't have been going on. So it got removed in October 2019. For 7 years, it became a meme to ask for global back, and Supercell would always say no, and the community would just keep asking, and they'd continue to say no. It was a back and forth thing. Stop asking, guys. We said no like 15 times. But it seemed like all that worked because it did eventually return in June 2026. Now, they didn't exactly add it back the way it was. This was a new version of global chat, but it's back. The only difference being that in this new version, you join communities and groups that has a leader and moderators instead of being thrown in some random chat. Queen AI changes. The Queen has always had some goofy AI. I'm sure you've seen countless memes about it by now, and throughout the years they've tried a couple of things to improve her AI. Like in April 2019, they implemented some changes that would help her and other ranged troops stop attacking walls for once, when they didn't need to. This change was going well for most troops, except of course, the Queen. If a wallbreaker blasted a wall open, the Queen would not consider those newly opened walls in her pathing AI, so she'd straight up ignore them. Obviously, this was not cool, and just 1 day later, they would revert these changes for the Queen only, so she was back to normal. Yeah, probably best. However, luckily, them reverting this change wasn't permanent, as months later, they would reintroduce these changes with her AI fixed, so it was all fine and dandy in the end. But yeah, that's everything I was able to find. There were some other smaller balance changes and tweaks here and there, but nothing crazy. I really hope you all enjoyed. But hey, YouTube thinks you might like this next video, so why don't you give it a watch? Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.